Hello and welcome to my channel. Some of you might recognize me from over on Booktok. Most of you are probably wondering, who is this British guy and what does he know about ACOTAR? Well, the answer to the second question is pretty simple, not a lot. The answer to the first question is, I'm M.A. Knights, Martin. I write cozy fantasy and I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. So why am I talking about ACOTAR? Well, I was gifted the box set and so I figured this book, this series is absolutely everywhere over on Booktok. I don't know about here. And I figured, well, I should give it a go. I've got the books. Why not give it a go? A little bit of background about me. This is not my usual kind of read. I am, first and foremost, a Terry Pratchett fan, which gives you an idea of the sort of books that I normally consume. And this kind of romantasy adventure story is not what I would usually read. I'd also done my best to pretty much ignore this series as much as I could for the last couple of years, mainly because for those who haven't read it, there is a lot of negativity surrounding this series, as well as all the hype. And often you find when a series has a lot of hype around it, you do get that negativity, and it can be hard to really judge properly what the series is going to be like. I chose to just ignore it, which meant that I came into this book pretty much spoiler free. There's a couple of things I knew were going to happen in the future of the series, but I didn't know much more beyond that. I didn't even realize that this was a kind of Beauty and the Beast retelling. So let's get into it. First and foremost, my biggest fear with this book was that I just plain wasn't going to like the writing style. I've heard a lot of people say that the writing is just plain bad in this series, and my prior experience of reading Sarah J. Maas was basically nothing. The only thing I had read of hers was Assassin's Blade, which I think is the prequel to her other series. What is it called? Throne of Glass. And admittedly, the writing in that was very variable, but I did know that she started to write that when she was pretty young, so I could forgive a little bit of that. But it was a worry going into this book. But I almost immediately had my mind put at rest on that issue, because I could tell from the first few pages that the writing in this is fine. Is it Shakespeare level prose? No, maybe not. But it does the job that it needs to do, and there's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion. The second big thing that you hear about this book, as someone from the outside, well, this series in general, is that there's a hell of a lot of spice. So that was my second thing going in, was, am I going to be able to deal with the spice levels in this? I don't really read books that contain spice. I don't read romances. I don't mind a bit of romance, but it tends to be very much a side thing in most of the stories that I read. And the ones that do focus more on those relationships don't really contain much spice to speak of. Well, I needn't have feared on that front either, because this book really doesn't contain all that much of spice, in my opinion. I think that the rest of the series, I think maybe things get progressively spicier from what I gather, but this book, certainly, there wasn't much to speak of. So with those two potential barriers out of the way, let's talk more about characters and plot. The first thing I noticed was the characters, and I pretty much universally hated everybody. The very first character you're introduced to is Feyre, the main character, and she seemed okay at the beginning of the story. There wasn't really much to say about her. She was fairly bland. You're then quickly introduced to the rest of her family, who are just insufferable, frankly. She's got one sister who seems useless. The other one just seems to be horrible, and her father also seems to have just checked out. So at that point in the story, I was really concerned that I just wasn't going to be able to get behind any of these people. And I am a reader who needs to be able to get behind at least one character. I do like my stories to have some people that you can actually kind of get behind and like. Luckily for me, Feyre's family don't feature in much of this book. They're in a little bit at the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and that's basically it. So I didn't have to worry too much about that. Once Feyre gets taken to the Fey realm and we meet some of the Fey characters, I did get a little bit more invested. The two main Fae that we meet are Tamlin, the potential love interest, and Lucian, his friend. And at the start, you don't really know what to make of them. But as the story progresses, they become a little bit more kind of likable as potential allies. They certainly seem to be more nuanced characters with both bad and good sides to their personalities. And a large part of the first kind of half of the novel is really just trying to figure out exactly what their motives are and where they're coming from, and if they're telling even the slightest bit of truth. My main issue, however, when it comes to characters and their relationships to each other is the central romantic plot of this novel. I just didn't buy Tamlin and Feyre's relationship. It grew far too quickly for me, and I just didn't buy that they got there that quickly. Obviously, if you've read the book, you know that there is kind of a reason for that. And it is sort of explained away, but not really satisfactorily in my view. Yes, there were ulterior motives to Tamlin having brought Feyre into the situation he brought her into, but it still doesn't explain away how they seem to quickly develop this love for each other. It didn't feel real to me. One thing I do know about this series is that a lot of the fandom don't really seem to like Tamlin very much after book 1. So I'm wondering if maybe more of that will be explored in book 2, and maybe that will put my gripes with that relationship to rest. I'll have to wait and see. When it comes to the central villain of the book, they're not revealed until kind of 2/3 of the way through. And when they are, once you actually meet them, they're kind of, yeah. They're a little bit like one of those lesser Marvel movie minions who kind of doesn't really seem to make a great deal of sense. They don't really have much of a personality beyond, I'm evil. There was some kind of backstory to it all, but she didn't particularly stand out for me as an interesting bad guy. What was of more interest, really, was the reaction of the other courts and the characters within those courts to her and the situations that they've been placed into. That was of more interest than her herself. So how about plot? I think the most important thing I can say, first off, is that the pacing in this book is a bit off, in my opinion. It starts really slow, and that's okay. But once you get into the middle, things do start to drag a little bit. And it then all really speeds up in the last third of the book, or even the last quarter. The last sort of 100 pages, 150 pages, things really speed up. And it's almost like you've been reading a different book up until that point. So I'd say that while I did enjoy both aspects of the book, I'm not sure that they mesh particularly well together. And I think maybe we could have done with the ending being spread out a little bit longer, perhaps over the course of the book, and the middle of the book maybe being truncated a bit. Pretty much as soon as the third act gets going, you learn that everything you thought you knew about the plot up until that point was a lie. And it threw me a little bit for a loop, but I did kind of know it was coming at the same time because of the fandom and people that I'd spoken to. Although I avoided any spoilers, I knew that something was going to happen. What I did like is that you could have been forgiven at that point and thinking that all the secrets had been revealed, and then wham, there you are. Okay, now we know what's really going on. But there's still a few little secrets left to be unveiled, and even right at the end of the book, you learn of things that happened for a very specific reason that probably didn't seem important at the time, or you didn't realise the relevance of them at the time, and that kind of stuff's always fun. So I read this book entirely on my TikTok lives, and I kind of had a little community following along with me, reacting to my reactions to the book. Most of them had already read it. And so that was interesting in doing that. But because of that and because of them, I know a little bit about what's coming. I don't know what's coming, but I know that things are going to keep getting turned on their head. And because of that, maybe that's coloured my opinions of this book a little bit. I lost track of the amount of times that someone said to me, just wait till book 2, things really get going in book 2. To the point where I almost felt like fans of the series were trying to preemptively apologise for book 1 and just say, just keep going, don't worry about book 1, keep going to book 2, and I promise things will get better. And I don't think that needed to be done. I enjoyed book 1. If some of my criticism sounds really negative, it's not meant to be. I did enjoy the book a lot more than I thought I was going to. Certainly enough to carry on with the series and read book 2 next, which I'm looking forward to doing. And hopefully I'll start to get a better picture of what people love so much about this series and some of the characters that I haven't met. So overall, my thoughts are largely positive. I had a good time reading it. Didn't change my life in any way, but I didn't expect it to, and neither should it have needed to. Not my usual kind of book, and that's nice. I think that's good. I think that if you're like me and late to the party on these gigantic series with such a massive following, it can sometimes be difficult to pick out the grains of truth in everything you hear, because on the one hand you've got the lovers and on the other hand you have the inevitable haters. And for me, on this occasion, I think that the lovers of the series proved to be more correct in their opinions than the haters. The series fans seem to pretty much all agree that this book has flaws, but I think that the hate that's thrown at this book by the other side is largely unwarranted. So I am going to be carrying on with now A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm looking forward to starting that. I'll be reading that on my lives as well. So if you fancy coming and finding me over on Booktok, then do, and we'll have a look at this book together. Oh, I should say, if you're waiting for a star rating, I don't do that. I find star ratings to be far too prescriptive. I prefer to just give my general feelings about a book because things are so subjective. But if you like comic fantasy, if you like cozy fantasy, if you're a fan of any fantasy or sci-fi really, give me a follow. I'll see you in the next video.